I don't think anyone's joined us yet, but we're live.
Okay.
So
So when does the match actually start?
it should start in 6 minutes. James and or Robert have to send me the link. And then, I mean, I brought you along because I'm not really sure how to commentate since I don't really know much about chess.
I mean, well, there's not too many things to commentate about.
Hey, yo, we got Eric Meow here. What's up, Eric
Oh,
Meow? How's it going?
great. Now he's gonna spread the link to all my friends. What's up, Eric? How's it
Good. Send
going?
the link to as many people. Let's get as many people as we can on this stream. Anyone else watching? Like, I can't even tell how to see how many people are watching. It could just be Eric. I'd
True.
never know. But I mean, at least we'll have Alice watching, of course. Not bad. Eric, can you let us know if anyone else is watching? All right. I guess before getting started, we can run down what is currently happening. So we got our two finalists, James Lin versus Robert Jin, the two possibly best players at our school, at least according to this tournament. James has had a flawless run so far. He's beat everyone he's faced. He even faced Robert in the third round and took him out. And ever since, he's just been unstoppable. So yeah, Robert will have to beat him twice to actually win the tournament, which puts it kind of tough in his position. Robert was doing pretty well as well. He only lost to James Lin so far, which could prove to be fatal for him. Oh, where did everything go? Whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. 1 second. Here we go. Where were we? Yes. So Robert has lost to James, which put him into the losers bracket, where he faced Rin and won. He faced me, he faced Edward, he faced both of us, and he beat both of us. Beat Alex, beat Justin, and now we're going to see if he can take it against James in the end. Oof. All right.
Yeah, basically, we're just waiting for the match to start. It will begin in a few minutes.
All right. Hey, Mohammed, how's it going? So, we do have the top 10 players from our school, and I'll go and list who they are right now. So whoever wins this will take the number 1 spot. Whoever loses this will take the number 2 spot. I think your winner is either way, to be honest. Third, we have Justin Chang. Fourth, we have Alex Tan. Fifth, our boy Edward Yang right there. Sixth, we got David Yi. Seventh, Yimin Sun. Eighth was supposed to be me, but I'm not going to participate in the top 10 game. So eighth is going to be Arya Nagyari. Ninth is Marcus Yang. And 10th is Reno Zaki. These are the 10 players that are going to represent us against Bayview next week. And if this live stream goes well, we'll do another live stream like us versus Bayview, which in my opinion is more interesting than this. But
All right, how's it going, chat? Yep. I did lose, yes. That does happen every once in a while. No, I'm joking. Happens very often.
okay, I hear that we're being delayed. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm being delayed because Robert has to use the washroom. That's all right. Body calls. Who's Puny Rice?
I believe that is the hang.
Yihang?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. All right. They started. So let's get watching.
Oh, okay.
Just give it a couple seconds. Uh, oh,
S.com. Okay.
Leechess. Yep,
Of course, of course.
of course. There.
And they have started. So Robert has the white pieces, so he's at least got that going for him. Hey
Um.
Joseph, what's up? I'm sure they'll begin any minute now. Although James is what you would call a smurf, he is way higher than 1500 rated. Oh,
Robert.
Robert, how nice of you to join the stream. Although you should close it because I'm gonna suggest some moves during the stream that will look good.
Okay. Robert opts for the king's opening. I don't know what this response is called.
James Lin responds with what is called the Carol Con. It seems like they're playing fairly standard theory. James and Robert, please close the stream because I am going to be talking about potential moves that I think are good as well. So get out. All right. Yes, the exchange variation where E takes D5 is certainly aligned, but Robert opts for the knight to D2 move. Interesting. I'm not very familiar with this variation of the tarot card.
Not sure if there's a way for me to zoom in, make the chessboard bigger. Oh. All right. That's as big as it's gonna get. Hmm.
This is a very interesting response. There's quite a few moves that James could go for here. He can go for normal development. Maybe, probably with something like e6. He can take, of course, but giving Robert the knight in the center after Robert takes back. If he is feeling a little frisky, he could even go with something like c5 to challenge the center. But that would be moving your pawn twice, and usually that is not an ideal way to play the opening.
Mm-hmm.
But in the higher level play, anything goes basically.
I can even switch the perspectives,
Yes,
so you
sir.
get a better idea of what James might be thinking of doing right now.
Maybe he plays knight to d2, although I wouldn't recommend it. d7, pardon me.
Oh, D7.
Although I wouldn't. Personally, I don't like that move. It blocks your bishop, it stops your connection. He
Oh,
opts for the
wow.
trade.
Very
And
fast.
yep, a very natural move, attacking the knight and developing a bishop.
This is why I brought Edward along to help me with this.
Hello there, Panda. Again, another very natural move, moving your knight out of the way, but also counter-attacking the bishop. Now we'll see how Robert continues his development of his pieces. Bishop to
Okay.
e2. A little passive, but maybe he intends to move it to, I believe that is b4 at some point, or f4. My apologies.
F4? Oh, what?
F
Oh, sorry.
G4, my bad. G4.
All right.
I am not very good with my squares. I don't use the notation very often, so my apologies if they're inaccurate. Some fairly natural moves are just developing the knight forward, maybe play d6 for black.
D6 for black, like with the queen.
E6. My apologies.
Oh, E6. All right.
Yes, to develop the bishop.
Oh yeah, I would open the rank for the bishops.
Of
Or for
course.
bishop.
Oh, and it looks like he chooses to develop a knight. From my experience,
Oh,
yep, that is a fairly natural move in this position, as you want to develop the black bishop, but once you play e6 to try and develop the black bishop, you can see there's no squares on the diagonal. That is nice, which is why James opted for a temporary pawn sacrifice, perhaps.
I see. So if he takes, looking to exchange queens, possibly.
Perhaps exchange queens, but then he'd be down a pawn. This is, and Robert opts not to take. Well, the idea behind c5 is that after black plays e6, he can recapture the pawn with on c5 with his black bishop. Now both players develop their knight, fighting over the center. I honestly, I don't see any immediate threats with taking the pawn for white. They would be just up a pawn.
I just got a comment from Robert in our private chat. I hope James and Robert aren't listening to this. Robert says his plan is to run James out of time. So, don't know if that's a joke or not, but that is a valid
Okay.
strategy.
All right. Robert plays queen to b6, b3, attacking the b7 pawn.
This
B7 pawn.
This
Yep.
pawn.
Obviously, if the queen gets to take the b7 pawn, it'll look pretty bad for black, as their queen side will be entirely ruined.
What do you think? Should you move up the pawn?
I could see b6, but although that would weaken the knight too much, the opponent would be able to play bishop to b5 and then pin the knight against the king. Yep, opting to trade queens. Although now James allows pawn takes c5, which is a move, which I think it will win a pawn for white. After queens go down, yep, and Robert sees it. Now, will James opt for the queen trade, or I don't think he will allow.
Oh,
yeah, I don't think he will allow black to take on b7. So, yep, and now. Oh, maybe his idea was to gain center control with e4 after the pawn left d4. e5 after the pawn left d4. But now, as a fairly natural move, Robert cements his pawn as it was being attacked by the bishop right after black moved the pawn. And now white is just up a pawn with a very solid structure on the queen side. He can castle and develop his bishop, and his position is looking really nice. That pawn in c5 prevents black's bishop from doing anything very useful at the moment. It could go to e7, but it's just there, so then black can castle. Maybe James chooses to castle queenside here, just to try and get some counterplay.
Aggressive option, I'd say.
Right. Ideally, in this type of position, maybe you want to try to get your black bishop on a longer diagonal, obviously. James goes with a little passive move, h6, right? Prevents the bishop from going to g5. And Robert goes he's starting to attack. The knight will have no choice but to retreat back, so it's actually a fairly strong move. Although the c5 pawn's hanging, white can just play bishop to e3 to defend it right after, or even continue his push. He is opting for attack, which is usually what you should do when you have more space and the opponent's king's uncastled. Technically, we're not in the end game. It's not necessarily after you trade queens, it would be an end game. There's still every other piece on the board. End games are usually just 1, 2, maybe 3 pieces left.
So I'll say thank you to Eric for reminding me to change the name of the stream. I had it like an idiot saved as Fry's practice stream, but thanks.
Okay, right. Now there were a lot of things that Robert could have done here. He could have pushed the pawn. He could have taken the pawn on e5, and try and get the bishop pair because it would attack the black bishop. Now Robert cements his queenside strength, and now also James has the, or he should protect the pawn on e5 as it is currently hanging. He could do that. Mainly, I see it, yep, by pushing it forward.
Moves it up.
That seems to be the only choice, and it offers a tempo as the opponent is probably going to move the knight.
So Edward, is it early or is it too early, or can we like determine who's in a winning position currently?
Oh, for sure, white. Black's pieces are all stuck. Rooks basically cannot move. Bishops are stuck behind pawns, whether it's white or black. Black's knight on e8 can't really hop to anywhere as of the moment. It can hop to maybe e6, but it'll still be a while until he gets counterplay. And now black cannot even take that pawn since the rook is pinned to the other rook. Robert is just gaining more space. However, I would say this allows black's knight to hop back to c6 for some potential counterplay. And now on the queen side, although white has a lot of space, black has some chances of recovering. It was not as much of a forceful position as before. Yep. Although a potential plan I could see James going here is probably g6 and then bishop to g7, as on that diagonal right now. Robert opts for a good check. Reminder that the pawn is pinned to the rook, and this will force black to move his king into a very awkward position.
Well, yes.
Now, some of you may be thinking that you can block with the knight. However, knight would take back from e5, and if pawn takes, bishop takes back, and you would lose the rook.
Yeah.
And now, the only potential source of counterplay was the idea that I said before. G6, bishop G7, and then the bishop would be on the long diagonal, eyeing down the weaker pawn on C3, I believe.
Yeah.
As that is the last pawn in the chain, so it is the weakest one. This also now James probably cannot castle as he is not. Well, realistically, James only has 2 moves right now: block the knight or move the king up to e7.
What about this knight?
Well, you would just lose a knight in that case.
True.
Because there are 2 attackers and 1 defenders. The bishop and the knight from white are both attacking that square.
Oh.
And he opts for a sacrifice.
Very surprising.
Very surprising. He sacrifices the bishop for the rook. And now the knight is pinned to the king, so he can't even move up. Black's queenside pawns are fairly weak. I would say this position is completely winning for white. There are not much counter plays that black can go for.
We might just see a second game. We might just. Wow. Very
Right, white
late
just
in the castle.
castles. Robertson no rush to make any aggressive moves just yet. He can take his time setting up his pieces in the best positions before attacking. Now, the position is fairly locked. On the queen side, there's a cascade of pawns. So the bishops do not really have any long diagonals. So if an idea that some people can go for is trading off your bishops for a knight, because knights will be more active in cases like this. And Robert decides to retreat his knight and probably attempts to move it to d5, where it will attack the pawn on b5. Now, James goes for some counterplay by attacking the pawn on c3. But the pawn is still currently defended, so Robert has no rush. He can just slowly improve his pieces, like he is doing right now, by attacking the knight and moving the rook onto an open file. Later, his plan might be bishop to e3, then to d4, and cement that center while the bishop gets some more activity, and then his knights can basically roam 3 and cause chaos all around the board. Side note that although the knight on e8 is not pinned right now, as Robert is up the exchange, he would be happy to trade material. So as soon as that knight moves, I wouldn't be too surprised if Robert just trades the rooks. And he is also up a pawn. Another reminder that if you look at black's pieces, his bishop all the way on h7 is only looking at black's own pawn. It doesn't have any real activity. White is just in control of this entire game.
Let's take a look from this perspective. James really taking his time. Oh, here we go.
He retreats the knight. And now, since the knight on e7 no longer has to guard the pawn on e3, James moves the knight to a central square and attacks black's pawn. Once that pawn is gone from b5, I believe, Robert can just shove all his pawns down the queen side, and it'll be absolutely crushing. And to be fair, I don't see any real way that black can defend that pawn. He can't. His knight is basically stuck on e8. If he moves, Robert will just go for a series of trades. He's up one pawn. He's up the exchange. He will be very willing to exchange. Or he doesn't even have, he'll exchange the rooks and he can just take the pawn. He'll be up 2 pawns. Yes. To Panda and chat, black is just in a stuck position right now. There isn't too much he can do about it. Side. Now if black opts to move knight back to e5 to attack the c3 pawn, when white's knight takes the pawn on b5, it will re-guard the c3 pawn, so that idea will not work either. And
James,
see, also James is very low on time. He's only
yeah,
down to 2 minutes, while Robert has 8.
just gonna say if
Uh,
James needs to
he's
speed things up, or else he won't stand a chance.
right. From my experience, James is an experienced bullet and blitz player, so I don't have much concern that he can play in time controls. It's just that Robert has very straightforward ideas. He doesn't really need to think about it much. He doesn't need to calculate much. It's just improve your pieces, take 3 pawns, and push pawns. Well, yes, I would say Panda, that white strategy worked out fairly well. Although I think James's downfall,
Oops.
he opts to move the knight there, which is a very interesting move. Perhaps he wants to move his bishop to see move his bishop up to gain some activity. Um, Robert, in no hurry, once again, just improving the pieces of his. He moves it down to d7, and nothing can really kick that knight out. And now, if James chooses to move his bishop to c6, I think Robert would be happily trading. Because another reminder that the bishop is also guarding the knight on e8, and there's a rook knight on d8. My apologies, and there's a rook all the way on e1. So if white gets rid of the bishop, that knight will be in danger. I think James's downfall really started with the move c5. If we go back a lot, it was a suspicious move at best. That was probably like move 6.
So downfall really, really early in the game.
Right. At least in my eyes, maybe James saw something I didn't. It was a free pawn that more or less. I mean, you could have some ideas of recapturing it with the bishop. I guess we can return to that position a bit later. Right now, Robert going on the offensive. Pawn takes. Black can simply push his pawn, in which he does, and now it's an absolutely crushing position. He can sacrifice the knight as the pawn will promote. If the rook takes, it's checkmate. Sorry, if knight takes pawn, rook takes rook, it's checkmate. And he is just running those pawns down. James will
James needs
probably
to
resign
start moving.
soon.
Well, yeah, you probably can't do anything at this point, but not sure what's going on in James's mind right now. I think this one's definitely in the books at this point. And James
there we
opts
have
to
it. James
resign the
resigns.
game, which means that we will go to a game 2.
Okay.
Robert and James will play again. They'll switch positions, and I don't know how long of a break they're gonna take.
Yes. And now he's out of time. We can maybe look back at this game if we
Okay,
go back to
so
around move 6,
around move 6, you said. So
if I remember correctly.
this
Right.
is move 6.
Move
Oh,
6.
said c5.
Okay.
That
c5. Yes, that was a very questionable move. Although this is a fairly common move in positions where you play d5, which is in this case, I think white can take the pawn. If the normal idea would be black would push the pawn on the e pawn, so his bishop would be able to recapture. But in this case, white is able to play b4 to support the pawn.
b4. This is b4. Oh, like that.
Right, to re-support the pawn after black pushes the e pawn. There are 2 rounds in this match. Because since Robert came from the losers bracket, if James won the first match, he would be the winner overall. Robert has to beat James two rounds in a row to claim the title of winner overall.
All right, so I just got the new link, and they're going to be starting soon. So we do need to put that last one to rest. Again, I'm just going to stop showing me and Edward. Oh, that's the wrong one. No one has moved yet. Waiting for us. All right. Robert, James, I know you guys hopped on the stream. You guys are free to start whenever you want.
But be remember to hop off when you start.
Of course. One cheating. So now James has the white pieces, Robert has the black pieces. I'm not sure what James more used to. Goes for the
James goes for e4. There's a lot of openings that can sprout from e4. Usually very dynamic opening at higher levels.
All right. I just would like to remind everyone that this is the game for all the marbles. This is the game that will solidify one as the winner of the tournament, and according to that tournament, at least, the best player in our school.
All right, Robert chooses the Sicilian, which is c5. Very standard opening so far. Still all theory. I mean, it's 2 moves in, of course.
All right. Oops.
James Lin goes for d3. Now, this is a very passive opening for white. White usually goes for d4 and tries to gain space. From an objective standpoint, if you were playing against a computer, I'm pretty sure d3 is an inaccuracy, but it appears that, wow, they are just blitzing out moves. So far, now that white has traded,
Okay.
is knight for a bishop. I would say that the position is fairly equal at this point. After some rapid moves, now black will probably choose to go for development by developing his knight or bishop. Maybe go for the same idea James did by feed and kettling his bishop. Although usually when you feed and kettle the bishop, you want to play an open position where the bishop can stare down the long diagonal. But as we see in this case, the diagonals are blocked by pawns. So black develops his bishop. White plays c3, kicks the knight out, and allows him to play d4 to push the pawn and try and open up the center in the future. Although I'm sure Robert is already thinking about that right now. Robert retreats. Take. Perhaps we see a castle, maybe bishop to g4. Maybe even knight to a3. Try and slot it on c4, or even knight to d2. Knight to d2 can also go to f3. White goes to castle, fairly standard. Now, white has the bishop pair, and what you want to do in these cases are just try and open up the position, because you can think of bishops as these snipers. You know, they have a much longer range than the knights, and that's how you take advantage of it. So, black tries to feed and kettle his bishop, as he In this position, I would say that's a good idea, as white will eventually try to open up the position, and that fianchetto bishop, which is a bishop behind that triangle-shaped pawn, will become very useful in the future. More useful than his other option, which is slotted in front of his current king on e7. Perhaps white will. Well, I'm thinking white will either make a move with his knight or bishop. Bishop would probably be to either e3 or g4. Okay, that is another way to open up the position. Far more aggressive. f4. Now, usually in positions, moving the f-pawn is a bad idea, as the bishop would be able to take advantage of the black diagonal exposed on the king. But in this case, James realizes that diagonals is not accessible to the bishop because the two pawns are blocking it. So f4 is a perfectly sound move in this position. Now, whenever white will probably play e5 at some point, try to open up the position and attack black's king as he has not castled yet. And if he does that, white squared bishop will become very active, and black squared bishop will have some activity too. Robert tries to trade that bishop. It is a fairly strong bishop. And if he does, it really weakens white's king side and make it prone to attack in the future. Now, from my experience with James, he is a very aggressive player. He might go for something like queen f3 if knight takes, queen takes back, and he has what we call a battery on the f7 pawn. Try to start some attack early. Maybe if he really likes his bishop pair, he would retreat his bishop. That is also an option. Although you could ignore it and just develop your knight, as a knight for a bishop is still an even trade. I did not expect that because James is usually far more aggressive. Perhaps he's playing for the title of best RHHS. RHHS. Few too many H's. He is being a bit more conservative and careful. White, right. Panda says, I feel like white has a stronger position. Right now, I'd say it's fairly closely equal. White does have more space. White does have the open file for his rook, but as you can see right now, black just gained a lot of activity for his bishop. Staring down that long diagonal, I doubt James will let the go down and exchange again, trading the rook for bishop, so he'll probably move it. And it's hard to say who's winning. I would say the position's about fairly equal because black will castle on the next move after white moves his rook, and yeah. Personally, I wouldn't have moved the rook back all the way down, since I would try to stack on the f5. Both players just continue fairly normal development. I would expect knight to f3, fairly natural move by James, just improving the position of the knight. Yes, this game is fairly balanced, although I think both players. James had played this position this game very conservatively right from the
Might have
beginning.
gotten spooked by what he did last game, and now he's afraid to screw up the same way.
Quite possibly.
All right. Robert moves his pawn up.
Robert's trying to gain more space, have some counterplay. In all fairness, if Robert felt like it, he could go for the same idea that James did by playing f5 and really opening up the position. Although I doubt he'd go for it. Seeing
Uh,
both players have been fairly conservative. Yes, the stakes are higher than the last game.
when the stakes are high, you change the way you play. All right.
All right, James goes for d4. There's a lot of choices that Robert can make. He can push c4, closing up the position. But he opts to trade, which I think is actually a positional blunder, but the position is still fairly equal. White is more spread out. Tough match to win for both, of course.
You know, if they stalemate, then we could actually see a third game. That'd be a very interesting.
Or just draw by insufficient material if they play this very evenly, which they're doing so far. Although I would say, I would actually say Black is getting a good position. Black has a lot of counterplays. As I've mentioned earlier, when you move the f pawn, the white's king is very susceptible, very prone to attack from the black diagonal. I just won't try to pronounce that word. Cannot talk today. And black right now has no longer has those pawns on the diagonal, blocking his bishop. White goes for a3, right? Black moves his bishop down to the longest diagonal on the board, gaining some activity. It attacks the pawn, puts pressure. I would say the position is slightly better for black despite the less space. Just because white has a much weaker king side. But it's still anyone's game. And in this position, white doesn't really want to play the move d5 because that would give black the entire open black diagonal, which would make his bishop very strong. Let's see what James comes up with in this position. Who's the guy on the bottom face cam? Well, I have no idea either. I think you should ask him.
Well, Yamin, I'll answer that question. The guy in the bottom face cam his name is Edward Yang. He is according to this tournament, in the top 5 at our school for chess, and I brought him along because he can do a lot better commentating than I can.
What Brian basically said is I have a big mouth, and to that, yes, I do.
Well said. Well said.
Again, we're seeing a similar situation as the last game. White is taking his time to think. I'm not sure what I would do as white in this position. Now he does opt
He
for
did what you said
d5,
not to
giving
do.
black a very good open diagonal for his bishop. That does
Hmm.
yep. As I've said before, moving the f pawn leaves the king very vulnerable, and Robert improves the position of his queen while giving a check. There's a severe lack of coughing in this match. Well, we can't really cough, or people will think we have COVID. So that is the downside.
There you go.
Okay. Black improves the position of his knight, opens up his rook on the open file. If white does the trade, black will undoubtedly have a better position as pawns on two pawns will be hanging after bishop retakes. White challenges the open file.
Got knights looking at each other and rooks looking at each other.
Yes, very nice standoff. Now I would say the position is better for black. White's bishop, again, similar to last game, is in a stuck position. Can't really do anything but guard right now. And if black ever chooses to move his bishop, it will be very strong. It will have the longest diagonal on the board, and it will have many active squares to go to. Another similar thing we're seeing from last match is James is playing very conservatively, and as a result, his pieces are all very crammed, except for his pawns. Other than his pawns, his knight, his bishop don't really have any squares to go to. He is just waiting for black to take the initiative and do something as black was doing just now by pushing the queenside pawns. What I have to say is James is not playing like his usual self. He's being very, very conservative, and that is leading to some questionable positions in this match.
I mean, I wonder why that is. Everyone has off days, though.
Every now and has off days, and this just might be one of them.
It's unfortunate, though. Today is the day where you want it to be one of your on days. I will say, though, quite like obvious to even people who aren't chess like avid players. I know you're supposed to take a while to think through your moves, but James is taking quite a long time, and it's really concerning me if it's going to get down to time in the end here.
For sure. Very active black knight right now, although white could easily kick it out. I think the main idea is to reposition it on c4 potentially and really just open up that black bishop's diagonal. Yep, which is what black is doing right now. Now, for James, I would expect something to like knight to d4. Try to move his knight into more active squares. He has a lot of pawns in his enemy's territory, which he could move his knight to support. Instead, he chooses to pin the enemy's knight to the black queen, which is an interesting move. Now, Robert will either probably move the queen or move the rook in to support the queen. Instead, he finds a nice tactic that wins a pawn, where since white's queen was also hanging, he could take the pawn, and the knight, as you can see there, can reach capture the queen once the queens are traded. And white could not capture black's knight because white's queen was hanging. Now black definitely has a better position again. White's bishop is very stuck. White's knight, again, not really any squares. all the good squares for the white's knight are being controlled by the black bishop. James tries to fight for the open file, but since the knight is guarding the square that the rook is currently on right now, black is allowed to challenge.
Edward, you should check the chat again.
Oh, this is a very nice idea by James. He plants the rook deep in black's position. If black were to trade, white would have a pawn very close to promoting. Wow. Has Robert calculated this through? He sacrifices his knight to get a pass pawn that will actually promote. White takes knight, pawn takes pawn. Actually, I'm not sure how well this will work out. White takes knight, maybe rook c1 check. King moves out of the way, pawn takes pawn. Rook takes pawn on b4.
This is a lot of. Okay, here we go.
I think this might be a right. There was the other option of pushing it down that way, but rook can go to h6. Now black's rook will probably infiltrate and go down to c1. And this will be a very interesting endgame. I am too. Oh, that's very interesting.
What is that interesting for?
Black is just taking all the squares away from white's knight.
Ah.
Right. Positionally, black is not really down much material because both of white's pieces, the knight and the bishop, cannot really do anything. James now has a lot of counterplay as e5 opens up the diagonal for his bishop because the pawns will disappear. They will get traded either way. However, that might have been actually a mistake because it was a free pawn. He was trying to make counterplay by creating a pass pawn of his own, but it created a very strong pawn chain for the black pieces. Right. e4 was coming eventually. Now probably knight to d7. That looks like the most reasonable move. Try and reposition the knight on c4, but then the rook is gonna probably come in and infiltrate. That is also a move. But I think that would just lose a pawn. As the knight is still under attack, the rook can just move to attack the pawn. Now the knight definitely has to move because it's under attack. James finding very interesting ideas to create counterplay as he now attacks the pawn on g3.
Hmm.
Although I think rook to d7 would be completely winning as that creates a path for the black pawn on h3 to run down the board. A reminder that the promoting square is guarded by the bishop, and moving the rook there would guard the square the pawn would need to push next. And a rook to d7 prevents white's king from getting into the game as it seals off his end, like creates a blockade. And now once again we see that the white bishop is blocked off while the black bishop has the long diagonal. Black also has more pawns. He can march the pawns down the center. He can march the pawns down the board. This might be another win for Robert. Not to mention that white is only down to 1 minute. That's why black is taking his time to calculate.
You mean I don't appreciate your comments in the chat? Although they are kind of amusing. Robert in no what's the word? No stress to make a move anytime soon. Is all the time
Well, he has nearly 4 times the amount of time.
4 times is a lot, is it not?
It is very much. As I've said before, James is a very capable bullet and blitz player. Those are time formats ranging from 1 to 5 minutes. I'm sure he'll be able to find some decent moves, but of course, more time equals more time to think and more accurate moves.
Plus, this is light chess. Lots of pre-moves possible.
Pre-moves are possible up to 1 move.
I want to believe you, Edward, but based on the last game, I'm not so sure. In terms of James's bullet abilities.
Again, some ideas that I have are pushing the pawn down the center, which is e3, or rook to, I think rook to d2 is the most crushing move, as I don't see any immediate way that black can stop the pawn from promoting without giving up his rook in the process. Now, of course, Robert might be thinking, if I move the rook down to d2, or white can play some checks. Robert finds a very interesting tactic for an exchange. If white takes the rook, black can play bishop to d4 and win back the rook because it checks the king. And this way, it also, if white decides not to exchange, that will mean moving the rook away. Of course, as Frying is pointing out, he will run the pawn down the board. White can try some things to hold on, like rook to a4, delaying the inevitable promotion of the pawn. But right now, there's just no stopping that pawn from promoting. Right? White can give some desperation checks. Honestly, anything's winning now. Rook can take the knight. The king can even move away if he really wanted to. If he were to move away, it would be to either f7 or a7 to avoid any further checks from the rook. And Robert is in an absolutely winning position. He has more than enough time to find moves for a checkmate with his advantage. And I think Robert will be the new winner of RHHS. It's going to be very hard for James to come back. It would take a mouse slip probably from Robert, and even in that case, I doubt that James has much chances here. He's still holding on because remember, Robert sacrificed his knight earlier, and the pieces are now they have the same number of pieces, but Robert just really has a dominating pawn. He has 3 more pawns that can march down the board and create chaos. Robert just moving his bishop into a more active square now allows him to push the pawn. And he has to be careful because he can now move the rook and give a check, and it will promote the pawn, and that is checkmate will come in a few moves. James is
Wow.
going to resign here probably. Robert is trolling by not promoting to a queen. He just wants to get a fancy checkmate, I suppose. Or perhaps he's just trying to avoid the chance of a stalemate.
Robert did tell me that he avoids promoting to a queen at times like this in order to avoid some screw up such as that.
That is very fair, although he has more than enough time to not make a stalemate while James is only on 4 seconds.
Ooh.
James trying to look for some perpetual checks, perhaps.
James not resigning.
He's trying to make a stalemate.
Oh, he did resign.
Okay.
So that will call it. James has resigned, which means that Robert coming from behind, actually shocking me, to be honest.
Winning 2 in a row.
Robert won 2-0, which means that Robert is now declared the top player in our RHHS in-house school tournament. 15-minute chess. That's right.
Bullet
You
chess.
could try
Yes.
bullet.
Honestly, I
whole
blame my
different
failures for playing too much bullet. Playing 1 minute chess is not good for your chess skills.
All right. Can we get some
Now I assume that maybe Robert's back in the chat.
Let's get
He
some
hopped on
congrats or
earlier.
well played or
Congratulations, Robert,
congrats.
as the winner of this tournament, if he is still watching.
Yes.
Now, if you really want to be a ideal commentator, we can go back and take a look at some of the games, some of the critical moments, if you want to.
We could.
That is up to you, but I know people have things to do.
What game do you want to look at? The first game or the second game?
We can look at both games, or whichever one you prefer. You're the president of the school, after all.
All right, let's do the first game, and then we'll look at the second game. And thanks for joining us, by the way, for everyone who did. It's been good. Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks, Alex. I just need to get the first game back up. And by the way, if James or Robert are watching, now that you guys are done, we can even have you guys on the stream to like give your comments on how you guys did. Okay. So let me just load this one up. This is the first game that was played. Oops. All right, so I'll just go through it. Let's see. Oops, well, that's the end position.
Congratulations, Robert.
Well played, Robert. All that's left is for me to input this into the tournament brackets and declare you the winner, which means that you'll be facing the top player from
All
View.
right.
And let's see how that.
If I were,
Yeah.
what I would say is the critical moment in this game was when James played c5.
Yep, that's about.
That just and the fact that I think Robert could have captured a lot earlier. James, I think, should have captured the pawn after Robert didn't capture.
Like right there.
Perhaps he might be worried about some bishop checks on g4. which case you can block with a knight and you still have a position that is very playable.
Oh,
Of course, the queen.
Robert has to pitch in himself. He says that the screw up was move 14.
Rook c4.
All right, let's take a look at that.
Was it this game?
Second game. Okay, well we'll take a look at the second.
Right. Okay, yeah. That real I was surprised that James actually traded his bishop with your knight. I think that was a positional blunder. We can turn on Stockfish to check in the second game. His because your knight was very isolated on the H square while his bishop was actually nice on a nice square on F4. And then Rook takes back just allows for your bishop to come out and gain counterplay. But that's in the second game. For the first game, I think c5 here. Robert, do you want to explain why you were reluctant to take c5? Because I see that you did not take it for a while. And I honestly don't see what's the problem with taking it here. Because usually in these positions, white after taking, black after white takes would move the e pawn up if they do queen exchange. Perhaps Robert just wanted to avoid a queen exchange. That's why he played queen to b6. To get the yeah, he says he's on his phone, so I'm not sure if this will work. But yeah, and losing the c pawn was pretty critical because it just allows white to gain a massive space on the queen side.
All right, Robert says that he's interested in joining us and providing his actual thoughts himself. Let's see if we can actually get him in here.
So, if I were to assume he wanted to avoid the queen trade, but it worked out in the end. He was able to capture that pawn and gain a lot of space. You didn't have to sacrifice your castling. You had a bishop on e2. And you'd be up a pawn, which, unless I'm missing something here.
Okay. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna have Robert join. Robert, you're gonna show your face? Oh, cool. I'm gonna have Robert join, and I'm actually gonna hide myself. I'll do my best to follow along with my mouse whenever, but just let me know, all right? So here's Robert, guys.
The move 9, like queen b3.
Oh, is that Robert?
Yeah.
Hey, Robert.
Hello.
Okay. So I was actually wondering, in the previous move, before you moved queen b6, why didn't you just take the pawn on c5? And that's just a personal thought. Did you want to avoid like trading queens?
Because if you look at move 8, knight c6, right? Played by black. If I take c5, then I lose my queen. I lose positioning for my bishop, and also because if queen takes after d takes c5, I gain a pawn, but he can win that back after he plays e4, e5.
Okay.
And as well, I lose positioning and the tempo of the game.
Because I was just thinking after you play e5, you can play b4. Because you have a pawn on c3. Usually in positions, you can't play b4 because the knight's there to retake, right?
I was playing white in this game, by the way.
Right. Yeah. No, you take. You trade queens, bishop recaptures, He plays
Yes,
e5.
bishop
You
recaptures.
play
But
e4.
the point is the bishop is then trapped in your backline, and therefore you also have to spend 2 moves to move it out so that you can link your
Okay,
rooks
that's
again.
fair. That's kind of fair,
Yeah.
yeah. But I was.
And
You also have the
also
b6 square then for the bishop. But it's okay.
Yeah, and also you lose a bit of tempo because when
Right, you move
black
your bishop
plays e5, when black plays e5, they don't lose tempo to recapture the pawn because they want to move the bishop there anyway, right? Because that c5 position is a really nice place for the bishop.
Fair.
Yeah.
Wait. As I was saying earlier, can't you play after e5? Can't you play b4 to support the pawn? Is it b4? I believe it is.
After e5.
Yes.
So which move would this be? Like
So c takes. Let's say queen trade. You recapture the bishop. e5.
e5.
e5 from black, and you play b4. And then your bishop can go to b6 on a fairly reasonable diagonal. And you can
yes, but the point is that if I play queen b3, it's a winning position instead of losing.
That's fair.
Or like defending.
Yeah.
Because that allows me to go on the offensive.
Right.
And in the case that if James didn't see it, I would also be able to play knight f5, which is an interesting move.
Yeah.
For a possible scholar's mate or somewhere close to that.
It's very interesting. Both of you, I think, played a bit conservative in this game. In both games, actually. I think James more than you, actually. But
I told James I wanted to play the Bon Cloud the second game, but I didn't get around to playing it. So if we can look at that game, and I can tell you.
Okay, yeah.
We're talking about that.
We can take a look at that game, but I think James's biggest blunder in this game was c5. Honestly.
I don't think c5 was a terrible move, but after
I think it's just a
b3
slight blunder.
It's just slight, like it's a slight mistake,
cascade of like his queen side slowly falling apart.
Yeah.
All right, we can take a look at the second game. If you remember, I'll talk about it right now. I think his positional blunder in that game was giving up his bishop for your knight, or letting you trade.
Letting me trade. Oh,
if you remember, your knight was on like
move 6.
I think actually when you moved your knight to h4.
h4. h4. I don't think I played knight h4 that game. Yeah,
actually, I guess we can scroll through some moves right now and see. Fairly standard opening. I did think d3 was a bit passive, although I know it's
just a
theory,
because I prefer not to play Sicilian against black. So normally I just try to play something that's as black. I try to play something that's more defensive because.
I was talking about the move by James, d3. I thought that was a bit passive for him. Right. It's just it blocks your bishop.
I was playing black that game. I was playing black that game.
Right. No, I was just commentating on his move, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
d3 is a fairly passive move. Although fianchetting the bishop and then probably try to open that diagonal was an idea, right?
Yeah.
And
then somewhere around here, I was thinking maybe I could push e4 and then later on have a chance at playing Bon Cloud slightly later on.
Okay.
However, it didn't work out because he started pushing his my king side, and my position there slowly fell. So I had to defend that instead of playing Bon Cloud. I believe the move that wasn't that great that he played, which was slightly passive, was rook takes f4, I believe. move
Right.
14.
The
That's the one
move
they
I
take.
was mentioning before was just letting your knight take that bishop on f4.
Oh,
If
on
you
F4.
remember.
Oh.
Right. We just got past there. I think
I don't believe it was that terrible because after you
Right.
knight takes F4, white's still winning in this position. Like if you take, then pawn takes, and he
Right.
has an entire
a
pawn
attack on
storm
the
coming.
side.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think if he left your knight there on the h4 square, your knight is really passive, and then another thing is you can
Yes, but
eventually
he
open
also
up
has to
the
develop his
center.
pieces, right? He has to
Right.
develop his pieces like his knight. He wants to connect his backline. And I don't think it's his bishop's that great in that position. It's kind of trapped. And after some play, I might be able to like pick it off or do something with it. So the trade isn't that terrible for him. As well, it allows his
Right.
pawns to start moving out.
I'm not saying it's terrible by any means. I just think it's a slight positional blunder, in my opinion. I'm not the engine.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I think we can both definitely agree that taking with the rook is a bit suspicious.
Yeah.
It
I
gives
believe it was
your
definitely
bishop
pawn
a lot
takes.
of play, a tempo, very nice tempo, allowing you to castle immediately right after. And I'm not sure rook all the way down to. Personally, I would have went to.
Rook all the way down to F1.
I would have considered
I feel like
f2.
rook.
Actually, no, f2 is a blunder. Never mind.
Yeah, because if you play, yes,
Right. No,
it was a blunder.
like f3 or something. Because before I had the idea that. Actually, never mind. It's not about me. I am being too self-centered and talking too much. It's about what you guys did.
Because you
Taking
also
with
have to
the
see
rook
that
is
if you want to have a stacked rook on that F file, he has to make sure that he can bring his other rook over because his queen is currently defending his knight, which is pinned, right?
Right.
So
yeah, of course.
if he moves back to F3 or F2,
Right, of
he has
course,
to move
not
his queen before he can
immediately
move his
try
knight.
to stack, but you leave yourself open for the idea in the future. That's what I was trying to get at. But I think in this also, I think what you did really well in this game was getting your black bishop the open diagonal while making sure his white bishop got stuck.
The black bishop with the open diagonal really helped with like
restricting
playing
the knight.
Yeah, restricting the knight and playing a lot better.
Right, because the whole idea of fiend kettling the bishop is so that you try to get the longest diagonal in the board, right?
Yeah.
And I see you opened up the center. Another slight mistake I thought he made was playing the move d5 at some point. Yeah, because it just
D5,
completely
yes,
shuts off his bishop and activates yours, while giving your knight some squares in the middle.
Yeah, while it attacks knight for the moment, it doesn't really.
I think this was just a positional blunder.
Even if he played E5, I think it would be better instead of playing D5.
E5, right? White will have a lot of counterplay. It's completely open and it's messy. It'll be a bit
like
messier.
sort of resets the position in a way.
Right. Although I've mentioned this earlier that when you push the F pawn, of course, you create weaknesses to the king, which you later exploited. I think the move right after with queen to B3, 6. Right. I believe.
Yeah, if you push queen B6.
And then
I think I could also have.
Sorry,
I think I could also have played at that point knight A5 instead of playing playing my knight into the center, because then I can keep pushing advantage on that side as there are more pieces that are already focused on that already attacked pawn that's pinned to the rook.
Right. I think another thing I think you did really well these two games is restricting your opponent's pieces movements. In both games, there were quite a few pieces that really couldn't get off the last two ranks. In this game, I think it was the bishop and the knight. I mean, the knight's basically shut off by your bishop, and the bishop was stuck behind the knight and those pawns. And in the previous game,
I feel like
sorry.
I feel like today James played a lot more passive than he normally does.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I
Normally
was getting
he
at.
plays a lot more aggressive, and
Yes,
he's
he
usually
is.
winning at the beginning of mid game. So
Right.
at
He
that part,
excels in
I know
very
he is.
dynamic positions. And yeah, but good job by you. You saw that he was playing passively and you took advantage of it. I mean, you just slowly gained the positional advantage.
Yep.
And in this game, you had a lot of nice tactics I liked. The one where you, yeah.
The entire time I was just trying to search for tactics to play, because over the past couple days and like past week or so, I've been just focusing a lot on chess.com puzzles
Okay.
to figure out if I can gain a slight advantage with some neat little tactics. Like
Right.
I think there was one where I played
Knight takes h4, I believe.
h4?
Three?
Yeah, knight takes
h4 or h3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
it would
your
allow me
rook to h2 was also a nice tactic.
Oh yeah,
Or rook to
that
h7
one was
maybe.
rook to h7, I believe.
Yeah. Rook to h7 was a very nice tactic as well.
Yep.
Yeah, but at this point, your position
I
was completely winning despite the pieces white has. Just because the bishop's stuck, the knight's stuck, and you have a lot of pawns you can just promote.
Yeah. Because the entire the reason why I found the h7 rook h7 move was because after the rook took that middle pass pawn from white, I was just focusing on thinking about how I could promote my pawn, because that's the only way to really gain an advantage, because I already sacrificed a piece, right?
Right, and I assume you also consider something like rook to d2, or it's a similar idea, just to get the pawn down this. But it's like, I think yours was.
I also looked at bishop to e. Wait, is it e? Yeah, it's e2. No, e4. Bishop to e4. To check first before I push my rook to h7. However, that tactic doesn't really work that well, because after rook to h2, rook e3, rook. Wait, is it rook e3? No, rook e6. If I sacrifice my bishop, I get queen.
Wait, so bishop I'm a little lost. How does white check after rook f?
So in this position, I thought about playing bishop e4.
Okay, yeah. Ah, yes. And then rook h2.
No,
I mean rook h7,
bishop,
right?
Is it bishop e4? I think it's actually
bishop d4.
d4 or d4?
Bishop d4 check.
Huh. Give me a second. I can find that right now. Yeah, right here, bishop. Oh no, sorry, bishop d4.
Yeah, bishop d4 check, and then I assume rook h7.
Yeah. So if he plays,
and then you found that tactic just by changing the order.
Yeah, but also that tactic, if you played d4 first, the tactic actually doesn't work, because of the fact that if he plays rook to d6, then
it attacks your bishop.
He attacks my bishop. If I sacrifice my bishop, right, and my rook is already on h7, and I push my pawn, he can play rook to d1 to stop the queen, and in the endgame, it's instead of being up a queen, I'm instead just up rook to knight and bishop. So it would be more difficult game to play.
You would have one pawn to compensate, but it's not completely winning like you are right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very nice games, I have to say. All right. Do you want to talk about anything else in any other key moments?
I think that's it for most of the key moments in the games that we played.
Oh, and you promoted to a bishop, I assume, to prevent the possibility of stalemate.
No, I just promoted to bishop because I just wanted to check him, to run him out of time. But because as I said at the beginning, I said that I was gonna flag him, and I wanted to hold to that promise.
And he resigned right before you flagged him.
Yeah, unfortunately.
All right. Well, if that's about it, thank you for coming on and just telling us your thoughts, and congratulations for winning.
Thank you.
All right, I think Brian's back, and maybe he has some concluding thoughts to add. Okay, I don't actually hear Brian, so I'm not sure.
Wow, hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Wow, that was embarrassing. Okay, I was just trying to say that if you were in the tournament and you participated, thank you for participating. Even if you lost 2 games in a row, you lost with dignity, so that's good. For those who came onto the stream and watched the finals, thanks for doing that as well. We appreciate the watches, and we'll actually be doing this next week at 4:30 because we're gonna go against Bayview, and Robert will face the top person, James will face their second best, Edward will face their 5th best, and so on and so forth. I don't know if I'll focus on one game that time or if I'll go back and forth between all 10. We'll see. But thank you. Congratulations to Robert and James and everyone who placed. It's been a good stream. Thanks, Edward, for joining, helping me out here. Edward will not be joining me next week since he's participating. But yes, thank you. Any last words, Edward?
Nope. I think Brian said it pretty well. Well, we'll see everyone next week.
All right.
Welcome, everyone. Yep.
Welcome. See you guys later.